It had been 25 years since I last showed up at headquarters, and I stepped in to mediate a dispute between two employees. One of the parties involved, Kenneth, the department manager, turned his anger on me and started complaining. "Don't talk down to me. And why are you, an outsider, even here? We don't need useless country bumpkins like you hanging around." In the next moment, Mr. Kingsley appeared beside Kenneth, his face flushed with anger, and shouted loudly, "Kenneth, what are you saying? Do you even know who this man is? Huh? Why are you so upset, Mr. Kingsley? This guy's just the new part-timer, right?" Mr. Kingsley sighed deeply at Kenneth's rude remark, ignored him, and bowed deeply to me. "My name is Eli. At 48 years old, I'm at the age where most regular employees would be at their peak in any company. Today, I came to visit a phone app development company. Back when I used to work here, it was a really small company that made home video game software. There were only 2 employees, including me, and we worked on games in a tiny room with just our computers. However, once we started working on phone apps, the business took off. And now the company had grown to the point where its headquarters was a massive building in California. So tall it hurt your neck to look at the top. I had been living out in the countryside, and now they called me back for work. It seemed like a lot of young employees had joined while I was away. I couldn't help but wonder if they even needed me anymore. As I gazed up at the headquarters, I suddenly felt a jolt on my shoulder. When I turned around, a man in his 50s was glaring at me. It seemed we had bumped into each other. Sorry about that. Standing in front of the entrance as I was, it might have been my fault, but the path was wide enough for him to avoid me. I raised my hand in apology and stepped back, but the man snorted and stared me down. I felt a twinge of irritation at having my return to headquarters disturbed. But I gestured for him to go ahead and stepped aside. "Don't just stand around in the middle of the path like some clueless country bumpkin." The man spat those words and, with a heavy sigh, entered the building. Shrugging it off, I took out the employee badge I had been given and entered the headquarters myself. Now, where was the development department again? I couldn't even remember how many years it had been since I last visited. I went up to the upper floors in search of the development department, but the building was filled with similar-looking rooms. And I quickly got lost. Just then, I noticed the same man who had bumped into me earlier. I was a bit surprised. He saw me too and immediately spoke up. "Hey, you. This floor is restricted to authorized personnel only. Outsiders aren't allowed. Go straight to your part-time gig and quit wandering around." The man must have thought I was a part-timer hired temporarily based on how I was dressed. Today, I was wearing a casual gray blazer with a white shirt and no tie, so he probably didn't think I was a full-time employee. He made a shooing motion at me like I was a stray cat. "No, actually, we're busy here. Just go to your part-time job." The man stares at me, interrupting my words as if I'm not worth listening to. I guess he thought he would watch me leave the floor. Resigned, I decided to do as he said and leave the floor. But as I was about to press the elevator button to go downstairs, the man grabbed my hand and stopped me. "This elevator is for full-time employees only. Part-timers like you should use the stairs." The man grinned as he spoke, clearly enjoying himself at my expense. Realizing he just wanted to humiliate me further, I felt a surge of irritation. But I didn't want to cause a scene, which would play right into his hands. So I swallowed my anger and smiled calmly at him. "Oh, is that so? My apologies." Satisfied with my response, the man nodded approvingly. I glanced at his employee badge. The name on it was Kenneth, Development Department Manager. Kenneth, huh? I'll remember that. I knew it was petty, but I made sure to get a good look at Kenneth's face as I headed for the stairs. I kept walking down the long stairwell, floor by floor, but after descending several flights, I realized it was pretty reckless to attempt going down dozens of floors on foot. At first, I thought it would be easy since I was just going down, but soon enough, I was out of breath. I had to take a break, so I stepped out onto the nearest floor, which turned out to be a break room. There was a kitchenette next to it, equipped with a fridge, a kettle, a microwave, and even a vending machine. Thank goodness. I'll take a break and then make a call. I bought an iced coffee and downed it quickly, realizing just how thirsty I was. As I finally caught my breath, I noticed my phone ringing. It seemed the person I was planning to contact had just called me. Hello, this is Eli. Where are you? I've been waiting for your call. The person on the other end sounded surprised. Never mind that. Just let me know when you get to the station, and I'll send a car to pick you up. So, where are you now? Right now? Well, I was about to say I was already at the headquarters, but I stopped myself. Since it had been so long since I last visited, I thought it might be a good idea to take a look around the company myself, to see how things were running now and what kind of employees were working here. With that in mind, I pretended I hadn't arrived yet. I'm not at the station yet, but I'll be there soon. I'll call you when I get there. I ended the call with that excuse. It had been 25 years since I last came to headquarters, so even the older employees like Kenneth didn't seem to recognize me. Thinking about that, I felt a sense of excitement, like I was a kid about to explore some brand new place. But I reminded myself that, at my age, it wouldn't do to be so giddy. Besides, wandering around too much might get me mistaken for an intruder, like what happened with Kenneth earlier. With that in mind, I decided to explore the building discreetly. As I walked around aimlessly, I passed by a meeting room and heard raised voices coming from inside. Let's stop this, Kenneth. Someone's going to notice. Intrigued by the tense conversation, I quietly approached the door to listen in. Who do you think you're talking to? I could have you kicked out of the development department by tomorrow if I wanted. Recognizing the voice, I peeked inside and saw Kenneth, the same man who had been rude to me earlier. He said he could kick someone out of the department, maybe he had some connections with the higher-ups. As I pondered this, Kenneth stepped out of the room and made eye contact with me. Quit wandering around like a part-timer. This floor is restricted. Kenneth shot me a sharp glare, but another man nearby spoke up. Wait a minute, is this the new hire? The new part-timer for the development department? Great. Go get me a coffee. Hurry up. Kenneth, seemingly flustered from having his argument overheard, vented his frustration at me. I bowed my head repeatedly in a show of submission. My apologies for the interruption. I'll get it right away. Satisfied with my response, Kenneth finally seemed to calm down. However, as he walked past me, he deliberately bumped into my shoulder before hurrying off. As I watched him go, the man who had stayed behind in the meeting room approached me. Are you all right? Kenneth can be pretty rough with both his words and actions. Thank you. It's my fault for eavesdropping. But if you don't mind me asking, did something happen to you? Remembering the heated argument from earlier, I asked the man. He gave me a troubled look but, after some thought, decided to explain. Kenneth's father is either the CEO or a high-ranking executive here. We're part of the development department. But Kenneth doesn't know the first thing about development. Thanks to his connections, he was placed as department manager, though. He always has his subordinates do all the work, then takes credit for the results, pretending to be a capable manager. His confession surprised me, but it also piqued my curiosity. That's awful. Nepotism, huh? Please keep what I said between us. I understand. I won't tell anyone. But don't you feel frustrated about having your work stolen? Is your work in development really something you take that lightly? I had my own passion for development, which is why I couldn't help but press him on the issue, even though it wasn't really my business. Of course, I'm frustrated, the man replied. But if I go against Kenneth, I could get kicked out of the development department. I love this job. He then grinned mischievously. I've put up with Kenneth's antics because I love my work, but I've reached my limit. That's why I added a little trick to the data he took from me. Any developer could easily fix it, but there's no way Kenneth will be able to figure it out. His boyish grin made me laugh. That sounds fun. But won't Kenneth try to get back at you for that? If that happens, I'll come up with another plan. You can't create good work when you're feeling stifled. Suddenly, the man realized he had been talking too much and looked startled. I've said too much to someone I just met. I'd better get back to work. Wait, can I ask your name? My name's Ted. Oh, and I'll get Kenneth's coffee, so don't worry about it. Ted kindly offered to help. But I shook my head and simply thanked him for the offer. No, I was the one who was asked, so I'll make sure to get the coffee. You should get back to work. Well then, I'll leave it to you. Ted smiled warmly, gave me a small wave, and headed back to work. After seeing him off, I called the number I had pre-registered. Hello, this is Eli. Yes, how can I help you? Naomi, my secretary, answered almost immediately after the phone rang. I'm sorry, but could you bring some coffee to the development room? Certainly. How many should I bring? Just one will do. After hanging up, I started thinking about why I'd been called back to headquarters after 25 years. Maybe I was brought in to deal with this situation. If that's the case, then I'll have to rise to the occasion. I steeled myself as I quietly entered the development room. Inside, people were preparing for a presentation, with Kenneth at the front, reviewing some data. The data on the screen was likely the one he had taken from Ted. Kenneth was so focused that he didn't even notice me entering the room. Just then, another man approached me, possibly thinking I didn't belong there. But as soon as he saw my face, he let out a surprised gasp. Wait, aren't you? Shh. Kenneth's presentation is about to start. I gestured for him to be quiet, and once he saw Kenneth begin his presentation, he seemed to decide to join me in watching. Kenneth started explaining the data smoothly, and the audience nodded in agreement, clearly impressed. Given how confidently he spoke, it was easy to see why he acted so arrogantly. However, his smooth performance only lasted for the first half. Midway through the presentation, the data on the screen suddenly glitched, and then the screen turned completely blue. Huh? What's going on? Kenneth frantically tried to fix the issue, but all his efforts were in vain. The blue screen suddenly switched to a shooting game that began playing automatically, accompanied by cheerful music. What? What is this? Kenneth scrambled to stop the game, but unable to figure out how, it continued on. He was quickly defeated, and after the game ended, a short video appeared on the screen. The video showed clips of Kenneth slacking off, napping lazily around the office, shirking work, and making snide remarks to Ted, exposing his bad behavior in a series of embarrassing scenes. This isn't what it looks like. There's been some mistake. Even though Kenneth was in a panic, he kept trying to fix the data. But no matter how much he pressed random buttons, sweating profusely, nothing improved. In frustration, he slammed down the keyboard and let out an angry yell. "Ted! What the hell is this? Your data is broken. Fix it, now." The other developers in the room shook their heads in disbelief, while the upper management looked at Kenneth with shock. He had just unintentionally admitted to stealing his subordinate's work in front of everyone. The man standing next to me spoke up. "So, this is Ted's data? What are you thinking, presenting someone else's work as your own? Ted, could you shut it down?" Following the man's instructions, Ted calmly walked over to Kenneth's computer and quickly shut off the screen. Instead of thanking him, Kenneth, shaking with anger, spat out his words. "This is your doing, isn't it, Ted?" As Kenneth prepared to lash out further, I spoke up, keeping my voice calm. "Kenneth, that's enough. You don't want to embarrass yourself any more than you already have." Everyone in the development room turned to look at me, their faces full of surprise. But the most shocked of all was Kenneth, whose name I had just called. Frustrated, he directed his anger at me. "What are you doing here? You're just a part-timer. Don't talk down to me. Where's my coffee, anyway? Useless country bumpkins like you shouldn't even be here if you can't do something as simple as that." As Kenneth advanced toward me, the man standing next to me stepped in, his face red with anger. He appeared beside Kenneth and shouted at him. "Kenneth, what are you saying? Do you even know who this man is? Huh? Why are you getting mad, Mr. Kingsley? Who is this guy? He's just a new part-timer, right? Whoever hired this useless country bumpkin is an idiot." Mr. Kingsley let out a deep sigh at Kenneth's rude remarks. Ignoring Kenneth, he turned to me and bowed deeply. "My deepest apologies. Not only did you have to witness this embarrassing situation, but you were also treated with such disrespect. I'm truly sorry. Why are you apologizing, Mr. Kingsley? This guy's just a part-timer." As Kenneth sneered at me, Mr. Kingsley was about to scold him further when, "Excuse me. I've brought the coffee," Naomi said, entering the room with 1 cup of coffee and heading straight toward me. "CEO Mr. York, sorry for the wait." "Thank you. I'm sorry to have bothered you with this," I replied, taking the coffee from Naomi and handing it to Kenneth, whose mouth hung open in disbelief. "Here you go. Your coffee." Kenneth, who had been so confident just moments earlier, suddenly turned pale and began shaking. His legs wobbled, and his eyes darted around in confusion. "Wait, what? CEO? Isn't this guy just a part-timer? What's the matter?" "This is the coffee you asked me to get for you." "Thank you," Kenneth stammered, taking the coffee with trembling hands, sipping it quickly before placing it down on the table. The other employees, witnessing the scene, glanced anxiously between Kenneth and me, while Mr. Kingsley rubbed his forehead in embarrassment, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. At that moment, Mr. Sullivan hurried into the room. It seemed Naomi had informed him about the situation. Mr. Sullivan hurried into the room, and when he saw me, he casually said, "Naomi told me, and I was shocked. Why are you already at the office? And what's going on here? In truth, I am the CEO of this company. I'm also Mr. Sullivan's nephew, and though I held the title of CEO, I hadn't set foot in the headquarters for 25 years. So it's no wonder the current employees didn't know who I was. The only one who recognized me was Mr. Kingsley, one of the veterans of the company, which is why all this confusion unfolded. I was watching the development presentation, but it seems like there are quite a few issues. So, you figured it out already. That makes things easier. Please, won't you return to headquarters? Mr. Sullivan's request caught me off guard. When I was still a student, I had developed a now extremely popular game with my uncle. With the profits from that game, my uncle founded this company, becoming the president, while I took on the role of an advisor, aiming to grow the company together. As times changed, we expanded into phone app development, and the number of employees gradually increased. However, in my pursuit of perfection, I often gave harsh feedback, which created a tense atmosphere within the company. When I was younger, I couldn't handle the stress of not getting things exactly how I wanted. And I even yelled at employees in front of their colleagues. I'd made them work overtime for days to complete projects, which eventually earned me the nickname the Drill Sergeant. It was my uncle, then the president, who always mediated between me and the employees, skillfully diffusing the tension. Seeing the troubled expression on his face, I decided to step back and move to the countryside. Leaving the big projects to the company, I focused on developing simple yet quirky games, living off their modest earnings. That was 25 years ago. By the time I looked up at the towering headquarters building earlier today, my uncle had grown this company into what it is now, all on his own. As I stood before the building, I realized that stepping away and letting the company evolve without me had been the right decision. I hadn't expected to be given the title of CEO at some point, though. Snapping out of my nostalgic thoughts, I turned my attention to Kenneth, who was visibly shaken. Kenneth couldn't hide his surprise at the fact that I, whom he thought was just a part-time job earlier, was actually the CEO of this company. By the way, Kenneth, you mentioned earlier that you could kick Ted out of the development department by tomorrow. What did you mean by that? Oh, that. That was just a bluff. I thought if I said that, everyone would believe I had connections with the upper management and treat me favorably. I see. It's impressive that you could convince people with such a lie. You've got a talent for persuasion. It's a shame you haven't put that skill to better use. I wasn't mocking Kenneth. While his approach was misguided, I was genuinely impressed by his ability to make people believe in his false authority. But upon hearing my words, Kenneth collapsed from his chair, falling to his knees and practically clinging to me as he shouted his apology. I'm so sorry. No, stand up. If you're going to apologize, it should be to Ted, not me. Based on that video, it seems like there's a lot you need to make up for. Kenneth slowly rose to his feet, his eyes red and on the verge of tears, and stood before Ted. Ted, I'm really sorry for everything. I was always jealous of how you, despite being younger than me, kept coming up with innovative ideas. I'm getting older and don't feel like I can learn new things anymore. So, I envied your creativity. Kenneth, I'm truly sorry for everything I've done. Kenneth placed his hand over his heart and sincerely apologized to Ted. Watching this scene, Mr. Sullivan looked at me with a thoughtful expression, clearly plotting something. So, how would you resolve this, Mr. York? I get it, Mr. Sullivan. I laughed back at Mr. Sullivan and turned to Kenneth, who remained drooped. Kenneth, from now on, I'm going to personally teach you everything about development. And if you're truly sorry, you'll work together with Ted and support him going forward. Wait. I'm not getting fired? It seemed Kenneth had braced himself for the worst, fully expecting to be fired after his rude behavior in Ted's incriminating video. But I don't give up on people that easily. I enjoy teaching people who don't know the joys of development. It's like playing a simulation game where you nurture talent. It's fun, isn't it? So, from now on, Kenneth, I'm going to give you a thorough education. As I smiled, Mr. Kingsley muttered under his breath, "You're still got that drill sergeant style." Ha! The drill sergeant? Kenneth, trembling like a newborn fawn, was clearly shaken. The role reversal from his earlier arrogance was almost comical, and Mr. Sullivan couldn't help but chuckle as he tried to wrap things up. Well, he did retreat to the countryside for a while, living a quiet, retired life. I'm sure he's mellowed with age and experience. With that, Mr. Sullivan left the room, laughing heartily as he went. The first to speak up after he left was Ted. The drill sergeant, huh? I like that. Kenneth, you're going to learn a lot. Mr. York, I've heard stories about you. And it's why I joined this company. Could I learn alongside Kenneth as well? Ted gave Kenneth a curious look, amused by the situation, but expressed a genuine desire to learn. You want me to teach you? That's a great compliment. Sure, you can join in. Now then, Kenneth, shall we begin? Yes. Finally calming down, Kenneth stopped shaking and looked me straight in the eye with a determined expression. After that, I was officially welcomed back as a special advisor to the development department, and so far, the process of educating Kenneth has been going smoothly. Surprisingly, Kenneth was gradually transforming into a capable employee. As I learned, when he was first appointed as a manager, he had no understanding of the development work. But because of his position and his prideful nature, he couldn't bring himself to ask for help. Since that day, I've been by his side, carefully teaching him the ins and outs of the development process. And for some reason, Ted has developed a great deal of respect for me. You were the legendary boy genius who founded the game company that was the precursor to our current company. Ted, somehow, had dug up an old article from when the game company was first established. It had been a long time since I'd been called that, and I felt a bit embarrassed. Ted himself had rapidly grown into the star of the development department. Kenneth, too, was slowly learning the ropes and gaining real skills. At this point, Kenneth could probably erase that incriminating video from that day without breaking a sweat. The atmosphere in the development department now was filled with laughter and camaraderie, nothing like the tense environment from 25 years ago. I, too, was enjoying my life at headquarters for the first time in 25 years. Having found people who shared the same passion, I now had comrades who would fight alongside me. Enduring the harsh trials as we battled through the fierce landscape of the gaming industry. Surrounded by like-minded subordinates, I was working in an enjoyable and fulfilling environment. All right, let's get to work. I slipped on my jacket, narrowing my eyes as I looked up at the towering headquarters building.